You're listening to the Pink Tax Podcast, where being a woman costs more and we've got the receipts. From overpriced razors to underpaid roles, we're talking money, power, and the price of showing up. Let's get into it. Welcome back, everyone, to the Pink Tax Podcast. Today, I am joined by a fabulous guest, Amy Diehl, who is a PhD and is an award-winning IT leader and the Chief Information Officer at Wilson College as a leading gender equity researcher. She is the author of Glass Walls, Shattering the 6 Gender Bias Barriers Still Holding Women Back at Work, and a sought-after speaker, consultant, and expert witness. Her groundbreaking insights have been featured in Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, and Ms. Magazine, as well as numerous scholarly journals and book chapters. Driven by a passion for universal gender equality, she helps organizations break barriers so workplaces can thrive and women can succeed. So I'm very excited to chat with Amy today. So welcome, Amy.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited that we finally get to have this chat because I think both of our books came out around the same time period. I think I had just had my son and you were also having a child of your own, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that's right.
2023.
My book came out in June and I had a baby in July. So
yeah, that tracks. I think I started writing my book when I was 8 months pregnant. So there's no rest for the wicked, is there?
No, not at all.
All right, so I wanted to jump right in. Most people I think have heard of the term glass ceiling, but your book is called Glass Walls. So I'm curious if you can tell us what the metaphor represents and what is the difference between the ceiling concept and the glass walls?
Yeah, so that's a great first question. So the glass ceiling, that's a concept that has been around for a very long time, and it's this idea that as women move up in a workplace or in a workplace hierarchy, they're hitting an invisible glass ceiling that is impenetrable, and in terms of breaking through. And in fact, the metaphor is that very few women have broken through the glass ceiling. However, when we did the research for our book, what we discovered was that it really was more than a glass ceiling. It's, I think the bias that women experience in the workplace is more like walls that surround us. No matter which way a woman turns, she's running into a wall that's invisible, but ever present. And so that's why we use the term glass walls. So it's not just that bias is happening to women who aspire to the very top of organizations or of politics or the like. But it's happening to all of us, and it really is a wall that glass walls that constrain us. So that's the rationale, the explanation for the metaphor.
Yeah, and I'm sure many people listening or watching have absolutely experienced those things. I know I did when I was in the corporate world, and I still come up against them when, you're working as an entrepreneur and as a speaker, and yeah, it's hard. So in your book, your research gives name to very, very common but often invisible behaviors. And I liked the two, He-Peating and bropriating. So one, I want you to tell me what those two things are, but I also want to know why you think having really specific vocabulary is so crucial for, both women experiencing the bias and for organizations that are trying to fix it.
Yeah. So when my co-author and I, Dr. Leanne Dubinsky, when we were doing the research, we would come across these concepts, we'd have data that would group together. And we would go and search the literature, and we would find there was nothing. Like, there was no term for it. There was, if there was anything written about it, we weren't able to, surface it. So what we did was, when we ran into a concept like that, we created a label. We created a term for it. One example of that is the term role incredulity. Where women are assumed to not be in charge or to not be the leader. They're assumed to be in a female, a traditionally female stereotype role. Yeah, exactly. So, and there were many other terms like that we, or many other concepts like that did not have names. And so in the book, we give them names and labels and give a definition, and then give lots of examples of how these types of biases are happening to women. You give examples of two of them, He-Peating and Bropropriating. Those two were actually not terms that we coined. They were coined by others. And in the book, we're very clear about where we coined terms and where the terms were developed by others. But those two terms, first one is Heapeating, and it happens when a woman says something and it's ignored, and then a man says the same thing and everyone loves it.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I've seen that happen at so many boardroom tables.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, a woman says something, she gives a great idea, and it's just kind of glossed over. And then a few minutes later, a man sitting around the table says the same thing, and people are like, oh, that's such a great idea.
Yeah. Where did you ever come up with that from?
Yeah. And then Bropropriating is a little bit more intentional. It's when a man actively takes a woman's idea and actively claims credit for it. So whereas He-Peating is often unintentional, Bropropriating is a little bit more intentional, where someone is actively trying to take the credit without giving the credit to the proper person who came up with the idea. And like you were saying, like it's often invisible, and it's not so much that it's invisible. If you don't know what you're looking for, you don't see it, right? It's just something that happens quickly in a meeting, quickly in a maybe a team setting, and you just like gloss by it. Oh, this person said this this woman said this earlier, but we don't think anything of it, right? And so the advantage of having terms for this is that it makes it so much easier to call it out. And even if you don't use the term, knowing that it has a term and what it is, it makes it so much easier to call it out. And not only for the woman to recognize that it's happening to her, but also for anybody else sitting around the table in that meeting. It is usually so much easier for a third party, another person, to call out bias, like when it happens, especially in a group setting, in a group situation. So in a situation like that, that's a really, really easy solution. If you hear that happening, you see that happening, you say, hey, Janine just had that idea. Let's hear more about it from her, right? Turn the conversation back to her, and you don't even have to make a big deal about it being a type of bias in that group setting. You can just redirect the conversation and keep going, right? Just making sure that the person who said the idea gets the appropriate credit, and it gets to speak more about it and fully develop it.
Totally. And I think that's something that all of us can do, regardless of how we show up in the world. If we're a woman at the table, if we're a man at the table, we can all call out that kind of behavior.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I love that. All right, so you have 6 primary barriers in your book: male privilege, insufficient support, I don't want to miss any, so I'm reading my notes, hostility, acquiescence, devaluation, and disproportionate constraints. Which of these do you think is maybe most surprising to leaders when you talk to organizations, and which one hurts women the most?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with the second part first, and which one hurts women, which one hurts women the most. And in some ways, it might be kind of surprising, and because I really think it's insufficient support that hurts women the most. And the reason I say that is because there's a couple things, but one is there's actually been studies. There's a study that we cite in our book that talks about study the concept of ostracization, if I can say the word right, basically excluding women, like ostracizing them, right? And it talks about how the study found that was more likely to lead to turnover than was harassment, like
Really?
hostility. Yeah. And the reason for that, I believe, is because if you run into a situation where you are harassed, but you get support for that, like, your boss believes you, your HR department believes you, they stop it, they make sure that the perpetrator, has sufficient consequences, they make sure that you are fully supported, you're going to stick around. You're going to say, hey, this is a place that values me. Even though this bad thing happened, this is a place that values me. But if you're ostracized, then you've got like no support, nothing, not from your boss, not from your coworkers. You're just kind of out on like your own little island. You're going to be much more quickly to, I think, to leave. But even if you don't leave, then certainly, it's going to be harmful to your emotional, your mental, even your physical health. So that's why I say that I think that's the one that's most harmful to women. And it's much more subtle, right? Because like, if you're not being supported, it's not like this terrible bad thing is happening to you. It's not like you're being berated or sexually harassed or anything like that. But it's truly just can be just as harmful, if not more so, because it's not, you've got no support and it's not being dealt with. So then I turn to the other part of your question, which is, which one is sort of like most surprising to, when I speak about this to leaders. And I think it really is the last one, acquiescence. So we say acquiescence is the result of all the other barriers. So the woman has dealt with the male privilege culture. She's been devalued. She's not had support. She's dealt with hostility. And as a result of all that, we too often, we make it's a very rational decision, but we acquiesce. We acquiesce to our supposed place in the male privilege culture and environment, which means that we maybe stay silent on anything that's happening to us, or on sexism that's happening, or bias that's happening to others that we see. It also means that we may not go for that job, go for that next promotion or that next opportunity. We may say, I'm just going to stay where I'm at because I don't want to deal with the hassle, right? And the reason I say that this might be the most surprising is because I think too often we think, well, that's just the woman's choice. She's just chosen, like, she wants to stay in her, let's say she's in a mid-level role. She wants to stay in that role. She's chosen that. She's decided to prioritize her family. And so that's her choice. But really, it's not completely her choice. When the whole environment is telling her, no, you stay put in your spot, which is a spot getting work done, certainly, but maybe not contributing as much to the overall organization and to decisions as they're being made at the top of the organization. Whereas if the woman had, was in an environment where she was truly equitable, truly equal, where she truly had the same opportunities as her male counterparts and truly had the same supports as their male counterparts, and didn't have to deal with, all this, extra, terrible things and biases happening, that, she might say, many more women would truly say, yeah, I want to go for it. I want to become the director. I want to become the vice president. I want to become the CEO of the organization. But like I said, I think that's the most surprising, because I think that they often assume that when a woman decides that, hey, I just want to stay in this entry level role, this mid-level role, that's her choice. And that's,
right.
That's what she feels is best for her. It's really a result of the environment.
Yeah, at that point it becomes like you said, not really a choice. It's like the minimum wage worker who has to choose between taking time off work to care for their sick kid during COVID, who's not allowed to go to school, and working their minimum wage hourly job that they need to pay for electricity. It's like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's not really a choice that you have. And, I think that really illustrates how this impacts women in the workforce that are, maybe ambitious and trying to climb the corporate ladder, and then just feel like it's all kind of all for nothing. They feel hopeless. They feel like nobody's going to support them, that they're going to have to continue to deal with the BS that they've always dealt with. So I really like that. And I think it's an important thing to call out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I love the 6 primary barriers. I'm sure there's lots of other barriers that, women continue to face. And of course, we know, like, any level of intersectionality we're adding to this is just going to make all of those barriers even more challenging to navigate. But I'm curious, and we do get political on this podcast, how do you think all of this has shifted in the time since your book has come out and you've started having these conversations in both Canada and the US, with obviously the current administration in the US, and we've started to see kind of the rollback of DE&I policies in both US and Canadian companies?
Yeah, I think it has shifted, unfortunately, due to the political environment. The term DEI has become demonized in many contexts. Many organizations are choosing to eliminate their DEI departments, and some are, instead of eliminating them, or renaming them. For example, renaming the department to like terms that would use the word like belonging, for example. And like, there's nothing wrong with these terms. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are inherently good things. They're good things for organizations. They're good things for society. It's just a political climate that is trying to regress us back into a space where women stayed home. Women were, the caretakers of the home, of the children, and didn't have opportunities out in the public sphere. And so that's like the sort of the ultimate goal of, trying to revert to a male, really revert us to a male dominated public sphere and workforce. What I see is, I see two things. Like, one, since the book has come out, and even before that, I go back to when I first started doing this research in 2009, and as I was starting to do the research, I was doing literature review, and there was some things written. There's certainly, a lot of things written about gender bias, workplace gender bias, but not to the extent that I see today. Like, I think about one quick example is the term mansplaining. So mansplaining, Rebecca Solnit coined this term, and it's when, a man starts explaining to a woman something that she knows more about than he does.
Of course.
And this happened to Rebecca at a party, right? Yeah. This happened to her at a party where this man at this party starts talking to her about a book that was just written, and he was talking to her about her own book. But my point about
God.
Yeah. So the origin story of that is really interesting. But my point about mansplaining is, like, that's now a dictionary word, right? And this was like in I believe the late 2000s that she coined this. But it's now like a dictionary word, and it's now something whenever I go to speak and I talk about some of these new words, most everybody knows, they've heard of mansplaining, right? Which was something that, like, 20 years ago nobody talked about. Like, it was just something that happened to us. It happened to you, it happened to me, like, where, I can remember I had a male colleague that we were at lunch one day, and he sat and explained to me all of my research, like everything I was researching in my PhD program about women. He just sat there and was like, blah, 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 and telling me all about it. I'm like, okay, thank you.
Oh my God.
He was coming from a good place. I don't want to disparage him in any way, but it was mansplaining, right? It was like, okay, I'm a man, and I'm the expert. I therefore consider myself to be an expert on I consider myself to be an expert on everything, to the extent that I can, tell you all about it. Instead of listening, like, he could have, like, asked me questions, right, about, like, hey, what are you learning, and tell me about, but anyway. But my point is that as a society, we've come a long way, like, in terms of understanding and seeing gender bias and knowing that it exists and rooting it out. And so whether or not we have, something labeled DEI in our organization, what's really important is that the work still continues, right? And that, and I think that some of these organizations that just, like, threw out their DEI, like almost immediately, like what I question about that is, did they ever really mean it at all? Like, were they just having, right, a group or a department, for political reasons on the other, side? So I think that the companies that really understand it, understand that DEI can only help them. Like, they still have it, they're still maintaining it, and maybe some of them have renamed it, I don't know, but they still have the organization, and they are still doing everything they can do to support not only women, but other people, other underrepresented groups within their organizations.
Yeah, and I think, again, you make a great point there, that there were, and probably still are, lots of organizations that have, we care about women, we care about marginalized groups and equality, but they aren't actually doing anything within their organization. They aren't willing to have conversations about salary transparency or promotion rates, and they aren't willing to put those as KPIs in, their managers and senior managers' performance reviews. And so, yeah, that is a good way of looking at it. It sometimes feels, I have to remind myself to zoom out, because it's the same with the gender wage gap. It feels like we're moving so slowly, but like it was only one generation ago where women couldn't have their own bank accounts. So it's like we've come a really far way. Maybe I'm just impatient and it's not going fast enough.
Well, and it's also like there's backlash. I think for any social movement, there's a backlash is like, say, a natural thing, the thing that happens. And so I think that for this movement too, we need to understand that backlash is going to happen. There are people who are in power that don't want to give up that power, right? And they don't want to give up that power not only for themselves, but for their group. And, in this context, we're generally talking about white, heterosexual, class-privileged, able-bodied men. They don't want to give up that power. And so we should anticipate that there's going to be backlash and think about ways that we can navigate through the backlash and come out ahead on the other side. Because when we see the backlash, right, and we're seeing it now, like that doesn't mean that we stay silent, right? That doesn't mean that we just crawl back into our beds and hide under the covers. But what it means is that we should be even more vocal and make sure also that we're banding together as women and as other groups that are affected. To make sure that we are supporting each other, that we're not leaving ourselves out alone to fight this on our own, but we really are coming together to fight this and to continue the good fight for equality as a group.
Absolutely. And, to that point, my next question is, if there's men listening to this, or if men come up to you and ask you, as an ally, what can I do? I sometimes get this question, and I feel like they are in a place where they want to help and they want to be allies and they want to help move gender equality forward in the workplace, but they don't necessarily know kind of what the next right step is or what they can do. Do you have any advice for the men listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first step is I think the easiest step, and that's to call it out when they see it. And maybe backing up, step 0 is read about it, learn as much as they can about it. Certainly my book is a good resource.
I was going to say that's a great place to start.
Yeah. Learn about it so that you can recognize it, so that if you're the man sitting in that meeting and you see someone being He-Peated, you can say, I know what that is. I see this happening. I'm going to call it out on behalf of that woman. And I'm going to make sure that she gets the credit. The other thing is that when you're in those situations, like if you're on a search committee or you're just giving input to somebody who's maybe making a hiring or promotion decision, make sure that you're bringing up and advocating for the very qualified women that are in your organization. We know that they're there, right? They may not be out on the golf course, hobnobbing with, whomever, on the weekends or whatever, but that doesn't mean they're at work. They're there and they're doing the work, and they certainly deserve and are ready for promotion, for other kinds of opportunities at work. So make sure that you're saying in any situation that you make the decision or that you can influence the decision, that you are, strongly advocating for your women colleagues. And helping people to maybe overcome those blind spots of I'm going to hire, John based on, I think he's an up and comer, he hasn't proven anything yet, but he's an up and comer. And so he needs a chance, right? Whereas this woman who's been toiling away, at her job for the past 10 years and has proven herself over and over again, right, should be given, that's the opportunity, perhaps ahead of the up and comer who's never done anything quite yet.
No, and I think to your point, when I was involved in hiring committees at a previous corporate role, I remember kind of the, HR gets all the resumes or the recruiter gets all the resumes, and then they present them to the top couple or whatever that we want to maybe consider interviewing. And I remember looking at the group and I was like, there's no diversity in this. And the recruiter at that point was like, well, we didn't find anybody that was good enough to put forward, or there wasn't that many that applied. And kind of my response to the recruiters, like, that is actually your job to go and find a group of diverse candidates so that we can compare them. And I think, asking those questions, and you do it in a nice and respectful way, but I think asking them to make sure that they are coming to you with a diverse set of candidates is something that can at least move the needle forward in the respect of at least giving those people an interview and at least having that conversation with them, because a resume only tells you so much, right?
Yeah, and I think like your point about the recruiter is a very good one, because for women, often it takes extra encouragement for them to apply for a job. And, it's kind of like that old anecdote that is, if there's 10 minimum qualifications on a job posting, and a man meets, 5 of them, he'll apply. A woman will feel that she has to meet all 10 before she puts forward her resume. Well, the recruiter can be very, very helpful by going out. Like, we certainly have these networks like LinkedIn, and other networks, like going out through professional organizations and finding women who are likely very qualified and encouraging them. Just giving them that extra, extra encouragement to say, hey, I think, you would do really well in this role. Would you consider applying? I think that goes a long way to having a diverse pool, which then can be presented to, the hiring manager, rather than just saying, oh, nobody applied. Like, that's just kind of lazy.
And I do not believe that in Canada, where there's 38 million people, and in the US, where there's 300 million people, that we cannot find one qualified woman for the role. I refuse to believe that. So I think sometimes we just need to push against maybe what is easy, and it might create a little bit of extra work, but I think in the long run, it's absolutely worth it.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, you talked a little bit earlier, I want to go back to this, about role incredulity. So can you explain again what that is for people, and why and how this manifests in the workplace, and what is the impact to women's, long-term potential at a company when this happens?
Yeah, so role incredulity, like I mentioned, it is a term that we coined because there wasn't a term out there. And it's this basic assumption that women are not the person in charge. But what often happens is that we found in our research, we had many women that, let's say they were a physician, they would be assumed to be the nurse. They were a lawyer, they would be assumed to be the court reporter or the legal secretary, maybe. They were a director of an organization, they're assumed to be the administrative assistant, or sometimes the secretary, right? Or like they're a professor and they're assumed to be a student. Or they're a person attending a professional conference and they're assumed to be the worker in the hotel, And the first thing I say is there's nothing wrong with any of those roles. There's nothing wrong with them. The problem is the assumption that women must inhabit these stereotypical female roles, and that women don't inhabit, the leader roles. And so what happens is when this happens to women over and over and over again, it's like it's taking this emotional toll. Hey, like if you enter an office, can I speak to your boss? Well, I am the boss. Like having to assert your authority over and over again. It just wears on women, women's energy, and it also can detract from their overall authority, especially if the assumption isn't corrected. And so, again, it's just one of these things that seems minor, like it seems, can seem really minor, like, and it's, and a lot of bias, and I always assume the best of people. I don't think everybody has the best intentions, but most people do. And so a lot of bias like this is not somebody trying to be malicious. They just are making a mistake based on the stereotypes that are in their own head, which we all have stereotypes. That's the way that our brains work. But it's the thinking twice about it, to overcome it. So like if you're that person walking into an office and you see a woman, you're not sure maybe she's the secretary or the director, maybe just ask, what's your role here? Like that would be better than assuming that, that person's the administrative assistant and the boss is nowhere to be seen, right? So really thinking about it and trying to like overcome, the initial stereotypes, it's sometimes like often in hospitals, like the people working in the hospitals, they have name tags. So it can just be a matter of looking at their name tag to see what they are. Because
Right.
we would hear
Yeah.
from these women physicians would be like, it's on my name tag.
I know it says doctor right here.
It says doctor right here, and still they were assumed to be like, where's the doctor? Can I talk to the doctor? Like, I am your doctor. So, it's really important that we, do, just be reflective, when we're meeting somebody new, that we don't just make any assumption on what they are, and whether that's a man or a woman, right? I mean, because I think it works the other way, assuming that the man is the person in charge, right? Whenever
Right.
maybe
Yeah.
he is not.
And I think we all do it. Like I'll catch myself, being like talking about a doctor or talking about like just generally, and you use the pronoun he, and it's like, oh, I should probably just be using a gender neutral pronoun so that we're not assuming, right? I have a little one who is listening to everything I say, and I think, that's also where it starts, is in the household. You have to be careful, I think, on what we assume people's roles are.
Mm-hmm. My son has some books that actually, it was my mother. My mother has some books, right, from years ago. And it was very interesting reading some of these books because of the gender stereotypes in them, like the policeman,
Yeah.
the nerd, like it was all very stereotypes, which I find, that's something else that I find interesting, because like the books that we bought for him that have been more newly published seem to not, they're not as overt, with gender stereotypes, which is something else that I think has changed in the world in the past, let's say, 40 years.
Which is great. I think,
Yeah.
we need more men
Yeah.
as caretakers and in some of those taking roles and being involved in education and healthcare. I think it just makes more diversity in any group of people makes it better. So
Yeah, absolutely.
So you created, or you helped create, the gender bias scale for women leaders. So tell us what that is and how does it help women and men make more equitable organizations?
Yeah, so myself, along with Dr. Leanne Dubinsky and Dr. Amber Stevenson and Dr. David Wong, we created a scale to comprehensively measure gender bias. And the scale was based on Dr. Dubinsky's and my qualitative research, where we surfaced we had an article where we surfaced 27 gender-based leadership barriers, and we took those barriers and created a scale, basically. And the scale it's a scientifically validated scale in which measures gender bias across the 6 factors. In fact, this is where the 6 factors from the book were surfaced. So one thing I'll say about glass walls and the 6 primary barriers is that these barriers were surfaced from the creation of the gender bias scale for women leaders. And the reason that's important is because they are surfaced in a very scientific way. These are not the 6 barriers that are like just our favorite ones to talk about, or the 6 barriers that are the ones that are most often talked about. These are scientifically derived to map out what makes up what's a seemingly nebulous concept, gender bias. It actually isn't. Like, it can be broken down into its components, and that's what we're doing with the scale. So with the scale, the scale breaks down into 6 primary factors or barriers, and then there are 15 sub-factors. And so the nice thing about the scale is that you can give it in whole or in part to women in your organization, and then you can get a sense of what's actually happening in your organization. So let's say you give it to the women in your organization and they score high on lack of mentorship. Well, then you can implement like a mentorship program, right? Or they score high on their communication being constrained or their voices being muted, right? Then you can have an intervention to like maybe do training for your meeting facilitators or your leaders to help them run more effective meetings so that women's voices are being heard, right? So the nice thing about the scale is that an organization can use it to get a sense of what's going on within the organization, and then once they know what's happening, once they know like which types of barriers the women in your organization are scoring more highly on, you can, like I said, create interventions or create training to help mitigate and eliminate those particular issues. It is available on my website. My website is Amy, Amy-Diehl, Diehl.com. It's available on my website. The questions are freely available, so you can take them and use them within your organization. You can also, if you're an individual woman, you can also read through the questions and just get a sense of where gender bias may be impacting you. Because you may come across a question or two, you're like, I never really thought about that, but that's a type of bias. And so it's right there on my website. Feel free to take a look and use it for yourself or within your organization.
I love that. And I think what a great resource for people to be able to start to dive into that. Now, the barrier of acquiescence describes women limiting their aspirations or leaving the workplace after, hitting all of those glass walls. How can organizations actually create an environment that minimizes the emotional toll? And what can women do to resist the impulse to maybe self-silence or, manage that hopeless feeling of not wanting to contribute because they're so tired of running up against all of those barriers?
Yeah. So organizations, they must first fully commit to supporting women and not just giving it like lip service.
Right.
And
walking the walk.
So walking the walk. And so in the book, in chapter 7 of the book, we have what's called a gender equity and inclusion roadmap. And you can actually, it goes from level 0, which is like doing nothing, all the way up to level 5, which is full equity and inclusion. And you can actually read that chapter and figure out where your organization is on the roadmap, because it's not like you're going to start from doing nothing to have a fully inclusive organization, especially if you have an organization of any size. Within a few days or weeks or months or whatever, but you can go step by step to implement supports for the women in your organization to make sure that you've got true equity. And I'll just give you some examples. To start with, you certainly want to start with training. You don't want to end with training. You don't want that to be like your end thing that you stop with, but you want to start with training, right? You want to start with making sure that people know what gender bias is and how it manifests and what they can do to combat it. What we find though is too many organizations will stop there, right? They'll have a one-off training session and be like, okay, we're good. No, you're not. You've done the kind of sort of bare minimum if you had training, and you have not just a one-time training, but on certainly annual or ongoing training. But there's so much more that you can and should be doing to make sure that the women in your organization are truly supported. And some of that is just having structures in place so that if a woman does run into bias, harassment, any type of hostility, she's got a safe place to report and is truly supported. She's not silenced, it's not just glossed over, but that the leaders take it seriously, to take her report, her complaint, to investigate it, to make sure that the person who has been exhibiting the bias or who has perpetrated harassment is again truly dealt with in whatever manner is equitable for the situation. But you just want to make sure that you have this no tolerance policy for any kind of behavior that excludes women, that minimizes their contributions, that keeps them from truly contributing to your workplace. Other things are doing pay assessments, looking at your pay data and making sure that women are not being discriminated against monetarily. Looking at your policies, do you have what is your parental leave policy like? I talk about that maybe much more so for the United States that we do not have any kind of mandated paid family leave across the United States. Some individual states do have it, but if you're sitting in a state like my particular state, there's nothing. The United States has 6 weeks of unpaid leave, but there's no paid leave. And so even in the absence of there being any kind of federal program or state program, you can make sure that your organization does something, right? Your organization can make sure that you have a paid leave program for your new parents or people who may have to support sick family members or their elders. So there's lots of tips in the book. There's lots more beyond what I just mentioned. But it's really just making sure that it's not just the talk with, we support women, but you're truly walking the walk. And what's the other part of your question? No, I've forgotten it.
No, I think that's great. And I think that really helps us figure out like ways we can reduce that emotional toll on women. And I think, when women feel supported, they're less likely to do any self-silencing or opting out, if we want to call it that. I think, to your point about parental leave, I'm very passionate about this subject. I think Canada still has work to do in that space. We max out at about $2,700 a month, which when the average rent in the city I live in is $1,900 a month, I don't think that is enough. Support companies can do more, but I really think there are lots of countries around the world that can absolutely step up when it comes to maternity and parental leave. And I remember I was at a conference in the US a number of years ago. There was an organization that, was talking about this, and they announced they had 4 months of paid maternity leave. And I think I was one of the only Canadians in the room, but I was shocked because it was like a standing ovation in this room of women. And I was like, what do you mean you only have 4 weeks? Because we in Canada have up to 18 months or not 4 weeks, 4 months, pardon me. But we have up to 18 months in Canada if we choose that. And I think, which comes along with its own challenges, but I think, seeing the stark difference between our countries, I was like, oh my gosh, these people are cheering for 4 months. And I don't know if there's any women that would be like, yeah, I'm ready to go back to work after 4 months here in Canada.
Yeah, exactly. I know my own experience was I had 10 weeks between paid leave, short-term disability, and by vacation. And that was like what I could, which is actually not bad. Like I look at myself compared to like what other people in my country, in my state, and like I don't want to complain, but at the same time, 10 weeks, 2.5 months, I wasn't ready,
Oh gosh, you're still in the depths of sleep deprivation at that point. I don't know how anyone is going back to work at that point. We all, I think, can do better, and countries can continue to hopefully push forward in paid family leave, because it's something that's so important, and especially making sure also I think men have leave as well, so that they can be involved again in those caregiving roles and understand what it takes to be a parent and be a working parent too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just like you said, it's so critical. And I think organizations are very short-sighted when they don't. Well, countries are short-sighted too, but organizations are short-sighted when they don't when they think, well, 4 months or 1 year, whatever the time frame is, I'm going to have to, pay out to have this, person stay home with their baby. It really is contributing to the overall society, right? And
Absolutely.
This is why governments need to be involved in mandating this kind of thing, because organizations often look at their bottom line, and they've got a annual report to their shareholders and whatever, that they can sometimes not see the big picture. But if we're not we're doing, people, women, men, people who have children are doing such a huge service to society, and we need to make sure they are recognized and compensated.
Absolutely. It is a full-time job raising a child. I can definitely tell you that. Okay, my last question for you. So one factor of the devaluation women face in the workplace is salary inequity. We know that the wage gap is real. And this year, I was actually just reading a report last week, shows that the gap is actually growing for the first time in a number of years. So obviously there are systemic changes that need to happen. We need salary transparency laws. We need companies to do reviews of those salaries, like you mentioned, and adjust. But what is maybe one piece of advice you would offer a woman to maybe combat this devaluation of her contributions so that she can ensure that she's actually compensated equitably for the work that she's doing?
Yeah. So this is I'll say a tough one, because there's two sides to it. One, I will give some advice to women, because there is advice to be given, but we have to understand that it's not on women to fix this problem.
Agreed.
Not on individual women, right? It's on organizations to fix the problem. It's on governments, having pay transparency and requiring equal, not just like we have in the United States law, equal pay for equal work, but it's a very tough legal case to for the people who do try to file that. It can be very tough to actually win. So making it easier, to prove is one thing that governments can do, and organizations, like we said, can make sure that they are paying everybody equitably. But for the individual person, because the individual woman always wants to know, like, what can I do to improve my own situation? So there's a couple things I would say. One is, firstly, do some research on what is fair market value for your role. And to the extent that you can talk to others in your organization, I know that in some organizations it's maybe you're not allowed to talk about pay, or it's very highly discouraged. I do encourage that if you are not overtly being restricted from talking about it, to have those conversations with your trusted colleagues, right? You have to know who you can have these conversations with, not just like indiscriminately. So do your research, to the extent you can in your own organization. There are some organizations, like public organizations in the United States, and I'm sure in Canada, where the pay is public data. I used to work for one with a public university, and so the pay was just out there on a website. You could go look it up. So you can do your own research in that regard, right? If it's in terms of determining how others are being paid in similar roles. But also, like, you certainly want to take, like, if you go and have a conversation with your boss or with your HR department, you want to take with you data. So this research that you're doing, you want to have data about, this is what I believe the fair value is for my role. Would you consider, like a market increase or whatever? And just know that like with that, we know that sometimes that same conversation from a man can be taken, often is taken a lot better than from a woman. So you have to sort of know that. But the thing I want to say about that, like, is that if you go and, you've presented an objective case and you're just being told, no, or that, where you see that it's, where it seems to be a situation where you truly are being devalued monetarily, then you have to know what your options are also outside of that workplace. Don't feel that you have to be stuck, right, in that particular work environment. It may be a leap for you, or it may be may seem like a big step, but if you, to the extent that you can, like, look at your options for other employment, right? Not all places, like, the thing I say about, there are toxic workplaces. There are workplaces that maybe aren't toxic, but don't value women well. But not all workplaces are like that. There are workplaces out there that do truly support women and that do truly do what they can to make sure that they're paying equitably and that that women are supported. So, so if you're not being supported in whatever way where you're at, just think about your alternatives. And that could be like going to another role, like your same kind of role in another organization, or it could be like, maybe you want to go back to school and learn a different trade, or maybe you want to become an entrepreneur and go out, work for yourself. Like just know that you don't have to be stuck, where you're at. If it's truly bothering you and it's truly not something, that you feel that you're being valued, then look at your alternatives and make some steps forward in that regard.
Totally. And, I asked this question because, in my book, I talk about, like, the things we can do as individuals, the things we can do as companies, and the things we can do as global citizens. And that's kind of how I usually view most problems, through three lenses, because I think sometimes as individual women, we feel like maybe we can't impact as much change as we'd like to, or you're impatient like me and you can't do it as fast as you would like the organization to change. So if you're listening to this or watching this and you're like, hey, I'm a leader in my organization or a manager, you absolutely have power and the ability to enact change within even your teams. And I think that's a really important point. And that is creating change kind of for the next generation coming up. And then, obviously, if you're an individual contributor, that can feel a little bit more daunting, you can, of course, look at, starting women's ERG groups or having those conversations with your managers. And I think, to your point, making sure you know what you're worth in the market. And I don't think it's the worst thing to apply for a job every couple of years, even if you're content at your workplace, and even just find out what the market might pay you for your skill set so that you can use that as a negotiating tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And, the other thing I've seen more recently in the United States is that certain states require job postings to list salary ranges.
Yes.
And that's just a treasure trove of information. It's not every state, it's not every job posting, but if you can go find those states that do require it and look for your type of job, that's a huge wealth of information that you can take with you.
Absolutely. And there's 2 provinces in Canada that allow that, or that require that, pardon me. Where I see it problematic, though, is when, I'm sure you've seen this too, the range is $50,000 to $200,000.
Yeah.
That's not really a range. I would like to see those ranges tightened up, kind of plus or minus 10%. But you're right. Even if it's not in your state, you could absolutely, or your province, you could look to a province where that information is available and use that kind of as just a starting place.
Yep, absolutely.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me today. I feel like that flew by. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so my website, amy-diehl.com. That's AMY-DIEHL.com. So there are links to order my book. There's also all of my published articles are listed out there. So I've got lots of articles, Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Ms. Magazine, as well as journal articles, book chapters. So they're all linked out there. The scale is out there. Lots of resources on my website. So come and visit me there. And there's a contact form if you want to reach out.
Amazing. And you are also offering our listeners and viewers 30% off Glass Walls when you order through the link that we'll include in the show notes. And there's a code that goes along with it. So if you're looking to pick up another read for kind of the fall moving into the winter, I think that this is an absolutely great option. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Amazing. Well, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and thank you for joining me here on the Pink Tax Podcast for another episode, and we will see you all next week.
Thank you, Janine, for having me.
And that's a wrap on this week's episode of The Pink Tax. Thank you for joining me on the front lines of financial fairness. Remember, understanding the cost of being a woman is just the start. Now it's time to demand your worth and build your wealth. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a step in dismantling systemic inequality and securing your financial future. If this episode sparked a fire in you, take a screenshot, tag us on social media, and share it with a friend who needs to join the movement. Until next time, keep your wallet guarded, your eyes open, and let's keep fighting for a world where pink is just a color, not a tax bracket.